The whole East Flanders town was stunned when a woman vanished in 1994, right before Christmas. To solve the enigma of Annie de Porter's disappearance that evening, the investigators put out endless effort. The fact that Annie was already experiencing melancholy added to the case's unsettling aspects, and left many wondering what would become of her. Law enforcement was on edge for 30 long years, because no one could have predicted the horrible truths that were going to come to light in this case. Annie de Porter, then 48 years old, was ecstatic about her weekend plans to hang out with friends in November 1994. She had been anticipating it for days, because it was an uncommon opportunity for everyone to be free. Annie was eager for the evening ahead and got dressed after completing her tasks. She departed from their home in the Belgian village of Sint Maartens-Latem, East Flanders, after telling her husband Hans D. that she would return shortly. The painter, Hans D., has a full schedule ahead of him. He left shortly after Annie because he had some shopping to do and was officiating a football game. After Annie left, he was too preoccupied with his work to speak with her again. Hans D. expected to find Annie at home later that evening after completing all of his work, but Annie had not returned, which was uncommon for her, as she rarely went out so late. Hans D. became concerned and started to ask her friends if she was still hanging out with them. He was completely taken aback to discover that Annie had never attended the gathering. Hans D. was alarmed by this news, because Annie had been struggling with depression for a while. Hans D. had attempted to persuade Annie to get appropriate care at a hospital, but she had always refused. She often argued with Hans D. about her insistence that she could heal herself at home. In the end, their kid also moved in with them, in the hopes that Annie would get over her despair by being surrounded by love and care from her family. Hans D. gave her every assurance that she was secure and well cared for. It was alarming that she hadn't returned home or even seen her friends. How could she be anywhere? What was her fate? He promptly called Annie's sister, Karina, desperate for answers, to let her know what was going on. Karina was quite concerned for her sister's safety, because Annie and Karina were very close, and Annie never went anywhere without telling her sister. However, on this particular occasion, Karina didn't know where Annie was. Given Annie's health issues, and the fact that she had most likely not intended to travel far, having left behind her passport, money, and other necessities, finding her quickly became a top priority. Hans D. and Karina filed a missing report for Annie, growing increasingly concerned. As soon as word of Annie's abduction circulated, family members hurried to Hans D.'s residence to comfort him and their son. Everyone found it difficult to believe that Annie, who was so graceful and kind and who loved her family, could just disappear without saying anything. The idea of her being out there by herself was intolerable because she was the center of the family. A thorough inquiry was started in an attempt to locate Annie. Investigators looked into every possibility, but this was in the 1990s, before modern high-tech technology. Every lead was meticulously followed up on by investigators using conventional techniques. They spoke with friends and acquaintances of Annie on multiple occasions in an attempt to find any information that may provide her whereabouts. In an attempt to find a lead, they painstakingly investigated the path Annie would have taken to meet her friends, but every search proved fruitless. Days stretched into months without any significant clues surfacing. The hunt for Annie grew more and more intense. The case grew colder by the day as time went on without any new information, in spite of their unwavering efforts and the backing of Annie's distraught family. The hunt for Annie became an excruciating mystery as time passed and no new information emerged. It was a very trying moment for Karina and Hans D., and especially for their kid, who was having a hard time understanding why Annie had suddenly vanished and how they were going to explain it to him. Year after year went by with Annie nowhere to be found. Even though Annie had not been seen in years, they clung to the hope that she would eventually return. But as time passed, Annie's family had to come to terms with the painful fact that she might not come back. In 1999, a full 5 years after Annie vanished, her husband had the tough choice to file for official acknowledgement of her absence. His request was likewise approved by the court, which formally declared Annie absent. For the family, this legal action represented a milestone that was both painful and hopeful. It acknowledged the potential that Annie was no longer alive, while yet maintaining optimism that they would one day find out the truth about her abduction. 30 long years had passed since Annie's unexplained disappearance, but the case had taken on fresh life. While tending to his garden in April 2024, a resident of St. Martin Latham spotted something strange buried beneath the ground. His uneasiness increased as he continued to dig until he discovered the startling reality. Concealed, there were human skeleton remains. Startled by the finding, he quickly notified the authorities. After quickly arriving at the scene, police and forensic specialists painstakingly excavated the bones and preserved any possible evidence. After that, the remains were sent off for in-depth examination and testing. The advanced condition of decomposition of the skeletal bones presented major hurdles to the examining process. Experts in forensics painstakingly pieced together the mystery surrounding the bones, searching for hints that might disclose the identity and circumstances surrounding the individual's demise. The test findings were available by May 2024. The discovery verified the horrifying reality. The skeletal remains belonged to Annie Deporter. Researchers looking through ancient files found that, in the same location where the remains were found all those years ago, a woman who looked a lot like Annie had been reported missing. After Annie vanished in 1994, a number of scars that had never completely healed were rekindled by this discovery. Her disappearance, which had previously been accepted as an insoluble mystery as time went on, now required a fresh look. Investigators had to locate any remaining family members in order to confirm the identification of the woman whose remains had been found. They traced out Annie's old home and were shocked to discover her son still residing there, clinging to hope that his mum will come home someday. However, her spouse Hans D. had already moved abroad and remarried. It was a difficult effort for the authorities to tell him that Annie had passed away and that her remains had been discovered. Her son was experiencing intense mental turmoil as he tried to come to terms with the abrupt knowledge of his mother's demise. Annie's son courageously consented to donate his DNA in order to assist identify the remains, despite the intense anguish. In order to determine for sure whether Annie's bones belonged to her, forensic testing required this DNA sample. In order to provide the family closure and provide vital evidence for the investigators, the DNA was transferred to a facility for processing. When the results were finally in, they verified what everyone had suspected. Those were Annie Deporter's remains. Now that Annie's name was known, detectives turned their attention to solving the mystery surrounding her abduction from 30 years earlier. Her son was asked to provide any information or suspicions about potential threats to his mother, but he was unaware of anyone with such a strong dislike for her. When investigators got in touch with the owner of the land where Annie's remains were discovered, they made a crucial discovery. The police discovered Hans D., Annie's ex-husband, DNA at the scene. Investigators initially doubted Hans could be involved because he had appeared close to Annie and had even expressed in media interviews his public sorrow over her disappearance. Nevertheless, they wasted no time in finding Hans in Belgium, where he currently lived, and they unearthed the much-anticipated revelation. Hans confessed to burying Annie's body 30 years earlier, but he insisted that he was not the one who killed her, claiming that he was paid to dispose of Annie's body, but didn't know the identity of the person who hired him. Despite Hans's denials, investigators had serious doubts about his account. They thought he was hiding important information and thought he was directly in charge of Annie's demise and burial in the neighbor's garden. Hans was swiftly taken into custody and accused of first-degree murder in the Annie Deporter case in May 2024. He is still being held pending his trial and sentencing. The years of uncertainty and suffering had finally come to an end for Annie's family. They now knew Annie's whereabouts over the years and the person who brought about her untimely demise. An important turning point in Annie and her loved ones' arduous and traumatic road towards justice was Hans's arrest.
In the suburbs of Belhaven, Greenwich, on the pleasant evening of October 30th, 1975, summer was in full swing. Martha was determined to convince her mother to allow her to partake in Mischief Night, the pre-Halloween tradition where harmless pranks were played around the neighborhood. After persistent persuasion, Dorothy, Martha's mother, finally relented and granted her permission. However, as the hours passed, Dorothy grew increasingly worried when she couldn't locate her daughter. She reached out to some friends, only to discover that no one had seen Martha. The search for her began, but it didn't take long to find her. Tragically, Martha was discovered lifeless under a pine tree, just 200 feet from her home, brutally murdered with a golf club. The events of that fateful night on October 30th left everyone questioning what had transpired and who could commit such a heinous act against an innocent young girl. The affluent community of Belhaven held many secrets behind its prestigious walls. Greenwich, one of Connecticut's oldest towns, boasted a rich history and culture. Situated just a 50-minute train ride away from New York City, this coastal town offered a delightful blend of New England charm and vibrant city life. The members of the Belhaven community were renowned for their wealth and influence, making it all the more shocking that such a privileged society could harbor dark secrets. Martha Elizabeth Moxley, a social butterfly, was known for her outgoing and fun-loving nature. Born on August 16, 1960, to Dorothy and John David Moxley, Martha was the youngest member of the family, alongside her older brother John. In 1974, Martha's father was transferred from his job in Piedmont, California, prompting the family to uproot and settle in a spacious mansion in Connecticut, thousands of miles away from their previous home, in the affluent suburbs of Belhaven. While this transition may have been significant, Martha quickly adapted to her new surroundings. In no time at all, she formed numerous friendships at school, as her classmates were drawn to her vibrant personality and self-assurance. In just a span of 9 months, Martha managed to become the most popular girl at Western Junior High School. Her popularity extended to the boys as well, making her quite famous. Martha was a remarkable individual who seemed to have it all. She was known for her friendly nature, athletic abilities, and artistic talents. Everything seemed to come effortlessly to her. Her brother John described her as someone who was easy to get along with, positive, and someone you would enjoy being around. Despite her immense popularity, Martha remained grounded and family-oriented. She would often spend her time at home, either sketching or playing with her beloved cat, Tiger. However, like any other teenager, Martha also had a wild side. During the summer of 1975, she would spend most of her days at the Belhaven Club, engaging in activities like tennis and swimming. She would socialize with children from exclusive clubs, who were considered to be of a different class. Unlike her other friends, these children attended private academies and boarding schools and enjoyed a level of wealth that even surpassed Greenwich standards. Among these children, the Skakel family stood out, as they were cousins to the infamous Kennedys. Martha had a close connection with the Skakel boys, Thomas and Michael. The Skakels were neighbors to the Moxley family, and Thomas and Michael were nephews of Ethel Skakel and Robert F. Kennedy. The families were related, with Robert being the brother of the late President John F. Kennedy. Ethel Skakel's brother, Rushton, and his wife, Anne, had 7 children, including Thomas and Michael, who were 17 and 15 years old respectively at the time of Martha's murder in 1975. However, the Skakel family was far from harmonious. Michael Skakel later attributed chronic illness, alcoholism, and a repressive Catholic upbringing as ongoing sources of turmoil within the household. In 1973, Anne Skakel passed away due to brain cancer, leaving her husband Rushton Skakel, who struggled with alcoholism, to spiral further into a state of despair. With insufficient supervision and unlimited funds, Rushton would frequently leave their children home alone. As a result of his mother's death, Michael Skakel expressed that their household descended into an even more chaotic state. Interestingly, the Moxleys lived just about 150 yards away from the Skakels. Due to the lack of parental supervision, the Skakel household became a popular gathering spot for teenagers. Meanwhile, Martha was enjoying her summer days within the secure confines of the gated community in Belhaven. Her teenage years were filled with occasional rebellious acts such as sneaking out, smoking, and indulging in a few beers. In her diary, Martha documented several incidents that occurred during these holidays, many of which revolved around the Skakel brothers. Martha was particularly concerned about the advances she received from Thomas. On September 12, 1975, she wrote, "Dear Diary, me, Jackie, Michael, Thomas, Hope, Maureen, and Andrea were driving in Tom's car. I was practically sitting on Thomas's lap because I was only steering. He kept placing his hands on my knee. Then I took over driving again, and Tom put his arm around me. He continued to engage in such behavior." Additionally, on September 19, 1975, Martha made a note about Michael, stating, "Michael was so completely out of it that he acted like a real jerk with his words and actions. He kept insisting that I was leading Tom on, even though I only see him as a friend. I told him, 'Well, what about you and Jackie? You keep saying you don't like her, yet you're all over her.' He fails to understand that he can be kind to her without being overly affectionate." It was evident that Martha had conflicting emotions about the Skakel brothers and often questioned whether she should continue spending time at their place. The uncertainty regarding her own safety and comfort weighed heavily on her mind. However, no one could have anticipated the events that would unfold next. On the 30th of October in 1975, the mischief hour commenced. Martha made every effort to persuade her mother to allow her to go out with her friends. Martha's father, John, was away on a business trip, leaving her with the opportunity to employ various tactics to gain her mother's approval. After persistent pleading, Dorothy finally succumbed to her daughter's request and granted her permission to go out for the night. Belhaven, the community they resided in, was known for its high level of security. Every individual entering or leaving the area was thoroughly inspected, making it highly improbable for any crimes to occur within such a safe locality. Martha ventured out with her friends Jackie, Jeffrey, and Helen, heading towards the Skakels' residence where they were scheduled to meet with their Kennedy cousins. As the night progressed, midnight approached. Dorothy was accustomed to her daughter occasionally missing her curfew, so her concern did not arise until 2:00 a.m. Initially, she assumed that Martha might have stayed over at her friend's house. In an attempt to locate her, Dorothy contacted Martha's best friend, Sheila, only to discover that she had not seen Martha since 9:30 p.m., around the same time when all the children had returned home. By 3:30 a.m., Dorothy was consumed with worry and decided to reach out to their neighbor, Thomas Skakel, who provided the same response as Sheila. At 3:35 a.m., Dorothy reluctantly gave up and contacted the police for assistance. The local Greenwich officers promptly arrived at the Moxley residence. After conducting a thorough search of the neighborhood alongside Dorothy, they found no signs of anything amiss. The officers reassured Dorothy and advised her to wait until morning. However, before departing, they disseminated Martha's information to nearby stations, urging them to remain vigilant for any sightings of her. Exhausted, Dorothy eventually fell asleep by the window, anxiously awaiting her daughter's return. The following morning, on October 31st, 1975, Dorothy hurriedly entered Martha's room, only to discover that her bed was empty. The authorities were once again summoned, and an unsettling sense of unease began to envelop her. She had a gut feeling that something was amiss. Dorothy refused to simply wait idly, so she made the decision to venture around the neighborhood accompanied by her son, John. The first place they decided to search was the Skakel residence. Despite living next door for 15 months, Dorothy had never set foot inside her neighbor's home. As she approached, their aggressive dog greeted her, leaving her quite shaken. Gathering her courage, she knocked on the door, and Michael, the younger Skakel brother, promptly answered. Dorothy inquired about Martha's whereabouts, but Michael informed her that Martha was not present and appeared to be in poor health. In fact, Dorothy suspected he might be hungover. Undeterred, Dorothy was determined to find some clue. She requested permission to inspect the camper parked outside, as she speculated that Martha might have fallen asleep there. However, her hopes were dashed when she discovered the camper to be empty. By this time, news of Martha's disappearance had spread throughout the community, prompting friends, neighbors, and the police to gather at Belhaven to search the premises. Shortly after noon, Martha's friend Sheila arrived at the Moxley household, trembling with fear, struggling to find the words to describe what she had just witnessed. Through tear-filled eyes, Sheila implored Martha's mother to call 911 for assistance. She revealed that something terrible had occurred, and Martha was unresponsive. Someone had attacked her, and immediate help was needed. Dorothy's companion Jean urged her to remain where she was while he investigated the situation. Upon reaching the scene, Jean made a horrifying discovery. Lying face down beneath the towering pine tree at the edge of the Moxley property, 200 feet away from her house, was the missing teenager. The back of her head had been brutally bludgeoned and a broken golf club protruded from the back of her neck. Martha's attire was stained with blood, and her jeans and undergarments were pulled down to her ankles. Adjacent to the young girl lay a shattered 6-iron golf club, which had been repeatedly used to strike her head. The force of the blows was so intense that the club broke into 3 separate pieces, scattered across the ground near her lifeless body, except for the grip of the handle. The law enforcement officials were taken aback by the gruesome discovery. In the past 3 decades, Greenwich had not encountered a violent crime of this magnitude, let alone something as atrocious as this. The local police were ill-equipped to handle the severity of the situation at hand. Consequently, a team from the Connecticut County Station was assigned to conduct a thorough investigation. The forensic experts diligently collected as much evidence as possible from the crime scene, while Martha's body was sent for autopsy. The examination revealed no signs of sexual assault, with the primary cause of death being attributed to the blunt force trauma to her head. It was later revealed that Martha Moxley had remained a virgin until her untimely demise. As the investigation progressed, the local police officers in Greenwich began compiling alibis from all known witnesses in order to establish an accurate timeline of events surrounding the homicide. The Skakel brothers were the first individuals on their list. Both boys were interrogated on the same day, during which they provided their respective alibis for the time of the murder. When questioned, Thomas Skakel informed the detectives that he had last seen Martha around 9:30 p.m. outside his residence. He claimed to have immediately gone inside after bidding her farewell, where he joined the family's new live-in tutor, Kenneth Littleton, to watch the movie The French Connection. Thomas later returned to his room to work on a school report about Abraham Lincoln, although his teachers denied assigning such a task. Eventually, Thomas underwent 2 polygraph tests. The first test yielded inconclusive results, but he successfully passed the second one. Michael Skakel informed detectives that he left his residence at approximately 9:15 p.m. and drove to his cousin Jimmy's house, returning around 11 o'clock p.m. The police harbored some doubts regarding Michael's account, but lacked concrete evidence to label him as a suspect in the case. 24-year-old Kenneth Littleton was also under investigation in the autumn of 1976. He informed the authorities that he heard noises outside the house between 9:30 and 10 o'clock p.m. Littleton mentioned that before going outside, he checked on all 7 Skakel children, noting that Michael, his older brother Thomas, and 2 other Skakel boys were not present at home during that time. Detective Solomon's reports indicated that Littleton heard rustling leaves and noises from the bushes on the property, although he did not witness anything at that moment. Littleton stated that he only saw Thomas at 10:25 p.m., when he joined him in front of the TV. The other Skakel boys returned home within half an hour. Littleton claimed to be unaware of Martha Moxley's identity, as it was his first night at the Skakels' residence. Despite failing multiple lie detector tests, Littleton was never formally charged in connection to the case. During the ongoing investigation, the police discovered 2 significant pieces of evidence. Martha Moxley had been beaten and stabbed with a Tony P. golf club engraved with the initials of a Skakel family member. Upon inspection, the same set of golf clubs was found at the Skakel household, with 1 club missing. Rushton Skakel, their father, who had returned from a hunting trip upon learning of Martha's murder, initially cooperated with the authorities but later ceased communication with them. On January 22, 1976, the Skakel family, following their attorney's advice, declined to respond to further inquiries and terminated their cooperation with the investigators. Martha's friends provided alibis that raised numerous questions. On the night of October 30, 1975, Martha Moxley joined her friends for Mischief Night, a neighborhood tradition involving pranks like ringing bells and toilet papering houses. According to her friends, Martha was seen flirting with Thomas, the oldest Skakel brother, and moments later, they found her kissing him. One of her friends mentioned seeing Martha and Thomas near the pool in Skakel's backyard, behind the fence around 9:30 p.m. Over the next few months, the detective conducted more than 200 scheduled interviews. All interviewees underwent multiple polygraph exams as part of the investigation process. Donald Brown, the state's attorney for Fairfield County at the time of Martha's murder, stated that while individuals are not obligated to cooperate with the police, it is unusual for someone possessing information about a violent crime to withhold it from investigators. Initially, the case went cold for nearly 2 decades due to a lack of information. However, in 1991, a rumor linking another Kennedy family member, William Smith Kennedy, to the murder led to the reopening of Martha Moxley's case. Although William's connection to the case was eventually dismissed, this development sparked new leads and reignited the investigation. In the same year, renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Henry Lee was brought in by the police. Dr. Lee utilized advanced technology that was not available in 1975. Dr. Lee examined various items, including clothes found in the Skakel garbage shortly after the murder. He discovered hairs in the fibers, some of which were microscopically similar to the victim's hair, while others were merely similar. Dr. Lee concluded that the hair belonged to a Caucasian male. However, the investigators faced a challenge as they did not possess any hair samples from the potential suspects, making it impossible to establish a match. Nevertheless, Dr. Lee managed to provide a potential motive for Martha's murder by studying the crime scene photographs. He noted that the blood smear on her body indicated an attempt to use force, suggesting a sexually motivated homicide. This revelation led to Michael quickly becoming the primary suspect in the case. Rushton Skakel, in an attempt to clear his family's name, allegedly hired a private investigator. He hoped that this would shift suspicion onto other suspects, particularly former suspect Kenneth Littleton. Unfortunately for him, this plan backfired. Private investigators Jim Murphy, a former FBI agent, and his assistant Willis Billy Krebs, a former NYPD lieutenant, became involved in the Martha Moxley case. During their interviews with Tom and Michael Skakel regarding their activities on the night of the murder, it was revealed that both boys had lied to the police. Thomas Skakel admitted that he had last seen Martha outside his house closer to 10:00 p.m., not 9:30 p.m. Additionally, Thomas and Martha engaged in inappropriate activity outside his home before he went back inside. According to Krebs, Thomas became emotional and started crying while confessing this, but his lawyer interrupted before he could say more. Meanwhile, Michael Skakel informed the investigator that he did not go to bed upon returning home from his cousin's house around 11:00 p.m. Instead, he had climbed a tree outside Martha Moxley's bedroom window and engaged in inappropriate activity. Author and journalist Dominic Dunn obtained the investigator's report and passed it on to State Inspector Frank Garr, who had previously worked as a detective on the case. Despite sharing his suspicions about Michael Skakel earlier, lack of information led to dismissal. This report provided new momentum to this theory. Leonard Levitt, an investigative reporter, covered the Moxley case in 1982 and also had a similar theory about Michael. He pointed out the absence of defense wounds, suggesting that the victim knew her attacker. Levitt believed that the repeated blows with a golf club indicated a crime of passion, implying a personal connection between the two. Levitt waited 20 years to report on Martha Moxley. The report revealed that both Thomas and Michael Skakel had made shocking admissions to the detectives. They confessed to lying to the police about their whereabouts on the night of the murder. Thomas claimed to have spent time with Martha after 9:30, engaging in a sexual act before leaving her around 10:00. Levitt emphasized the inconsistencies in Thomas' story. In 1998, a one-man grand jury and an investigator were tasked with reviewing Martha Moxley's case. After examining the evidence, Judge George N. Thim concluded that there were sufficient grounds to charge Michael Skakel with her murder. Michael faced trial for Martha's murder in his late 30s, finally receiving justice after nearly 2 decades. He was convicted based on circumstantial evidence presented during the 3-week trial. Investigators had found a piece of the golf club, a 6-iron from a set that had belonged to Michael's mother. However, prosecutors lacked direct physical evidence linking Michael to the murder case. He insisted he was far away from the crime scene at his cousin's house, watching Monty Python's Flying Circus. Nevertheless, jurors later stated they were swayed by his incriminating statements and erratic behavior. Several former classmates of Skakel testified during the trial. While at Eland School, a facility for troubled youths, Michael reportedly confessed to them about Martha's murder. One former schoolmate, Gregory Coleman, testified in a pre-trial hearing in June 2000 that Skakel had told him, "I'm going to get away with murder. I am a Kennedy." Coleman also mentioned that Michael had claimed he tried to make advances towards a girl who did not reciprocate, leading him to commit the crime. However, Coleman passed away in August 2001 due to a heroin overdose and did not testify during Michael's murder trial in 2002. Michael had a troubled past, with rumors circulating about his time at Eland School. Despite the school owner's denial of any confession, numerous witnesses supported the claim. 2 former classmates from Eland School, including John D. Higgins, came forward as witnesses during the trial. Higgins described Michael's confession as tearful, dazed, and fragmented, with Michael only recalling bits and pieces of the crime. Gregory Coleman, the other witness, stated that Michael confidently declared he would escape punishment for Martha's murder due to his family name. Following Michael Skakel's imprisonment in August 2002, his cousin, Robert Kennedy Jr., became a staunch advocate for him. Kennedy firmly believed that his cousin was innocent and being falsely implicated for political reasons. In his interview with CBS 48 Hours, Kennedy expressed his certainty, saying, "I know Michael Skakel, and I know he didn't commit this crime." In 1997, Michael Skakel collaborated with ghostwriter Richard Hoffman to write his autobiography, titled Dead Man Talking: A Kennedy Cousin Comes Clean. During the trial, a particular recording played proved to be highly incriminating. Michael admitted that on the night of Martha's murder, he was intoxicated, had consumed marijuana, and experienced inappropriate urges. When Dorothy Moxley arrived at his door the next morning, Skakel panicked. He confessed on the recording, "I was still under the influence from the previous night, a bit intoxicated, and worried if he had been seen." Michael claimed he was concerned about being caught by anyone from the Moxley household. Prosecutors argued that Michael's reference to engaging in inappropriate acts was actually him admitting to beating Martha with a golf club. Michael's defense countered by highlighting the lack of physical evidence against him and presenting an alibi for the time of Martha's murder. Nevertheless, the prosecution portrayed Michael as a jealous teenager during the trial. They argued that his rejection by Martha, combined with his drug and alcohol use and access to the murder weapon, led him to act on his violent thoughts. On June 7, 2002, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, resulting in Skakel's sentencing to 20 years to life in prison. The jury and state superior court revealed their decision just after 10:30 a.m., following the commencement of its 4th day of deliberations. Rushton Skakel seemed almost shocked as the foreman declared the verdict in the crowded, silent courtroom. The public celebrated the justice served. This case was one of the most intricate and sorrowful in the Northeast, enveloped in a whirlwind of affluence and fame. The 27 years of torment finally came to an end for the Moxley family. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Moxley confronted a large crowd of reporters and television crews. Through tears, she mentioned that she had prayed before entering the court. "My prayer began with, 'Dear Lord, once again today, just like I have been doing for 27 years. I prayed that I could attain justice for Martha,' she expressed. This entire ordeal was about Martha," she continued. "Today belongs to Martha. This is truly Martha's day. While Michael was incarcerated, His legal team and supporters fought for the annulment of his conviction. 4 appeals were submitted, all of which were rejected. Then, on October 23, 2013, Michael was granted a new trial due to the inadequate representation provided by his defense attorney, Mickey Sherman. Consequently, Skakel was released on $1.2 million bail on November 21, 2013. Prosecutors strived to reinstate Skakel's conviction. They eventually succeeded in December 2016 when the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled with a 4-3 decision, affirming the validity of his representation. However, the case did not conclude there. In May 2018, the court overturned its ruling with another 4-3 decision, determining that Michael's attorney, Mickey Sherman, failed to present evidence of Michael's alibi during the initial trial. Prosecutors still retain the option to retry Michael, although they will likely encounter challenges due to deceased witnesses and other issues. Michael's legal team, in a released statement, commended the court's decision, stating that it was the right course of action. The lawyers have also stated that Michael, who maintains his innocence, has been wrongly incarcerated. However, the Moxleys remain steadfast in their belief of Michael's guilt. "I have no doubt in my mind that he is responsible," Dorothy asserted. John Moxley, her 59-year-old son, expressed that the jury's decision in the 2002 trial, reached after considering the evidence against Michael Skakel, continues to provide him with reassurance. "We have a sense of comfort knowing what transpired," he stated. Currently 55 years old, Michael Skakel resides with his aunt in Westchester County, New York. He spends his days caring for his 15-year-old son, George, and striving to move forward from the trauma of his past conviction and imprisonment. He is legally obligated to seek permission from the court to travel outside of Connecticut or New York. "I wish to leave this nightmare behind so that I can start building a life with George, without this constant burden," he expressed in an email. "I lost 11 and a half years of my life. I missed out on George's entire childhood. I know I can never reclaim those years, but I consider myself fortunate to be able to spend time with George now." The death of Martha Moxley haunted the Greenwich community, her family, and friends for over 40 agonizing years. While many still believe that the verdict against Michael was fabricated, ultimately, a mother lost her daughter, and the state of Connecticut failed to deliver proper justice for Martha's death. Numerous individuals believe that Michael evaded punishment due to his connections and wealth. Martha's father, John David Moxley, fought for his daughter's justice until his death in 1988. Even to this day, the Kennedy family continues to be associated with the Martha Moxley case. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who authored the book Framed, Why Michael Skakel Spent Over a Decade in Prison for a Murder He Didn't Commit in 2016, left Dorothy Moxley, Martha's 84-year-old mother, speechless with his publication. She mentioned that truth had never appeared so distorted and manipulated in her entire life. Despite this, she remained convinced that Michael was responsible for her child's death. Kennedy's book dedicated a whole chapter to tarnishing John's character, Martha's father. He cast doubt on his whereabouts on the night of the murder and made several accusations against the Moxley family. As of December 2019, Michael Skakel is still a free man. The memory of Martha Moxley is forever engraved in the hearts of Greenwich residents. A young, beautiful girl was robbed of her innocence before she could fully blossom into adulthood. This is not the first tragedy that has been swept under the rug by the Kennedy family. The legal battle between Michael and the Moxley family was a nationwide conflict, and while there are still many unanswered questions surrounding this case, we offer our sincerest condolences to the family of the victim.
On a frigid November morning in 1988, Betty Rolf vanished during her customary stroll to work, only to be discovered the following day, brutally attacked and murdered near a railroad underpass. For over 3 decades, her case lingered in the shadows of uncertainty until revolutionary DNA evidence finally unveiled the harrowing truth behind her untimely demise. A cherished member of the Grand Chute, Wisconsin community, Betty, at the age of 60, exemplified resilience as she balanced multiple jobs to provide for her family. Among her various roles, she dedicated herself to the Country Aire banquet room, where she meticulously managed laundry and other responsibilities. Her residence on West Spencer Street was conveniently situated less than a mile from the banquet hall, making her morning walks an integral part of her daily routine. Despite facing numerous challenges, including a tumultuous marriage, Betty remained a beacon of strength and affection for those around her, rendering her fate all the more heartbreaking. On the early morning of November 6, 1988, Betty set out from her home for work, but that fateful Sunday, she never arrived at her destination. Her unexpected absence raised immediate alarm among her colleagues and family. As the day wore on without her return, concern deepened, prompting her family to report her missing to the authorities. The following morning, local law enforcement initiated a comprehensive search, while the community held its breath, anxiously hoping for news of Betty's safety. Tragically, their worst fears were realized when her lifeless body was discovered near a railroad underpass on West Spencer Street, a mere half-mile from her home. Betty was found partially clothed at a railroad crossing, the scene a chilling testament to violence. She had been beaten, assaulted, and strangled with a strap from her purse. Scattered around her were some of her belongings, including $30 in cash and a document she had intended to send to a local newspaper regarding her and her husband's forthcoming anniversary. The police initiated a thorough investigation, meticulously canvassing the vicinity for witnesses and gathering evidence from the crime scene. Despite their diligent efforts, the initial inquiry produced scant leads. The forensic technology of the era constrained the depth of analysis, causing the case to swiftly grow cold. For more than 30 years, the murder of Betty Rolf lingered as a chilling enigma. In 2019, investigators opted to employ familial DNA testing, a groundbreaking method increasingly pivotal in resolving cold cases. This avant-garde technique involved juxtaposing DNA evidence from crime scenes with genetic profiles found in public databases, aiming to uncover potential relatives of the offender. A significant breakthrough occurred when investigators discovered a familial connection to Jean Meyer, who had resided in Grand Chute during the period of Betty's tragic death, but had since moved to Washington State. With the list of potential suspects narrowed to Meyer and his brother, authorities concentrated their efforts on Jean Meyer after excluding his brother through DNA analysis. In 2022, investigators secured a direct DNA sample from Meyer while he was living in Washington. The forensic examination yielded a definitive match to the DNA collected from Betty Rolf's crime scene, establishing Meyer as the primary suspect in her brutal assault and murder. He was subsequently arrested for the crime. Following his apprehension for the heinous act committed in 1988, Meyer was transported back to Outagamie County, Wisconsin, where he awaited trial in custody. As the legal proceedings commenced, the prosecution diligently constructed its case, utilizing the irrefutable DNA evidence linking Meyer to the crime scene. As the case advanced through the judicial system, Betty Rolf's family and the community remained vigilant, hopeful that the trial would bring forth answers and closure. The trial, which unfolded over a week in May 2024, captivated the courtroom as the harrowing details of the crime were meticulously revisited and scrutinized. The courtroom was a battleground as the prosecution and defense engaged in a vigorous exchange, their arguments intricately woven around the forensic evidence and the tragic circumstances of Betty's untimely death. After hours of careful consideration, the jury ultimately arrived at a verdict, and on May 21, 2024, Jean Meyer was pronounced guilty of both the murder and the brutal assault. This conviction brought a long-awaited sense of closure to many. On July 11, 2024, Meyer received a life sentence, with the possibility of parole after 34 years for the first-degree murder charge, alongside a 20-year sentence for the first-degree assault with a dangerous weapon, to be served consecutively. Outside the courtroom, Betty's daughter, Sheila Worm, expressed her relief, stating, We can rest easy now that they have him and that he is going away for a long time. The community of Grand Chute, along with Betty's family, found comfort in the knowledge that justice had finally been served for the senseless violence that had cast a shadow over their lives for more than 30 years.